And so people who are alcoholics oftentimes also have a problem with B vitamins as well. And so there's a situation that's taking place like that I wasn't really going to touch into all that much. But have you ever heard that people that are alcoholics oftentimes get something called delirium tremors? They shake. That's your nerves. You're lacking some B vitamins at that point in time to help calm all that and regulate all that about the way that may end up be working. And so that was a technical piece. But yeah, absolutely, it's a good question. So like other things that can, if your pH of your gut is off, the pH, meaning like how acidic you are, that can destroy some of the vitamins that you're just, even though you're eating them, you're not getting them, you're not absorbing and assimilating them because you are destroying them. So, well, that brought the tone down a little, didn't it? You know what you need. Yeah. Yeah. And so, how do we go back up? Does anybody know? Now it's working. Yeah, it wasn't working before. Now it's working. So there you go. Where am I here? Helps lower, yeah. So one thing I think is the vasoconstricting versus the vasodilating. Are you trying to open up or are you trying to close down your blood vessels? Coincidentally, why would I want to make my blood vessels constrict more? That's something that's probably, this is just a weird thing. I didn't know if I was going to get into this, but you all seem somewhat interested. Let's say you have fluid buildup in your body, edema type stuff that's taking place. Many of you have had that, and your fluid gets backed up into your legs and things along those lines, and it may be that your heart's not pumping out enough of that fluid, and it gets backed up into your lungs, or there's different versions of which side of your heart is failing, left-sided versus right-sided heart failure and things like that. But there could also be a situation that maybe you're not creating enough pressure for your kidneys to filter out all that fluid and to pull the fluid off of your body, and you end up having like an edematous sort of a situation. That would be the time that maybe we would say, why don't we increase that tone? Let's create more of a vasoconstriction. Let's pick that up a little so that we can at least filter out and try to pull some of that water off of you. I'm almost certain most of you are dealing with water issue balances and stuff along those lines, and they're trying to pull things, diuretics and things along those lines. I am not a cardiologist. I'm not here to give you advice that way. But let's just say something like that were taking place in a non-acute, horrible situation. Do you kind of follow? There are different things that kind of promote that sort of stuff. Most of your blood pressure medications are working where? Do they work on your heart or do they work on your kidneys? Many of them are working on your kidneys, right? They're your kidneys. Why? Because they're trying to filter out more water. They're trying to have you pull out more water. Do you kind of follow? So if we're doing that, now that vasoconstriction, now that sounds bad, but now we're talking about things at a very small level. Anyways, my class at CWI is 10 a.m. Tuesdays and Thursdays. But there's a larger story. Please.
Was that constriction raising concerns?
Well, and that would be, yeah, absolutely. Well, that would be like your scale rate, but we're also talking about smaller level stuff. But yeah, absolutely. And that's why some people are like, no, don't do that. Do you kind of follow? And that's why we'd want to be paying attention to our cardiologist recommendations about what's going on that way. But if someone said, hey, maybe we need to try to increase that, maybe they would be pushing you this sort of a direction, if that makes sense. Like in the last talk, I talked about something called rutin that we find in different grains and stuff along those lines. Buckwheat is the number one source of it, if you remember that. They checked out rutin, and rutin was the number one thing that they found that would prevent blood clots from forming. And so why I think that's relevant is even the warfarin and all the Coumadin and all the other sort of stuff that they're doing to try to prevent blood clots, the number one thing they found was a natural source of a bioflavonoid, which is kind of like saying a vitamin A type of a thing, the best thing for that. And so if you're worried about clots, there's other things to do too. Do you kind of follow? Let's try to stop those things from forming maybe as much. When we're done, whoever brought this up, on the email I sent you that article just in case that thing came up again. I'll bring it up. It's the article from Harvard that I showed you guys the last time I was here that goes through all of that sort of stuff. But yeah, that's why we're kind of like, what are we trying to do here? And when we talk about this vasodilation, vasoconstriction, remember, it's not just of the major arteries, But the smaller ones that are things like within your kidneys that are really tiny compared to what would be going on in your aorta and what would be going on in your coronary arteries. It's things along those lines. Those clots are the bad ones, right? Those are the really, really bad ones. And I'd be more concerned about the clot at that point in time more than I would be about the constriction of the blood vessel. But that's me. I'm a chiropractor, right? And so, but I teach anatomy and physiology, and I have for 20 years. And there's a way that all of this sort of stuff kind of works together about how that all happens. So if we did, anyways. But yeah, it's kind of, I like the question. It's kind of interesting, right? That there's these different, and you think B vitamins are B vitamins. Who would have ever thought, right? About the way that works. Just to go through like the deficiency stuff when I talked about beriberi, they figured that out way back when, 1897, right? That's a long time. That's I can't. That heart block, the neuritis, the arrhythmias, this fibrillation, all of this sort of stuff. If you have a deficiency, this is what we're thinking you're deficient. Did you kind of follow? Like that's what you need. If we go to the other side of things, you're talking about pellagra. Pellagra is a funky one. Dementia. Anyways, we'll leave that one. The 3Ds. There you go. Angina, gastrointestinal disorders, and all sorts of stuff, and disorders of fat metabolism. These are the sorts of things the B vitamins are doing. The B vitamins are very much involved with taking carbohydrates and turning them into fuel for you. Okay, like there's a big part of that. It also does it. It also helps with fats. It helps with even you don't want to use your amino acids, which are proteins, for fuel. You want to build stuff out of them. But you can use them for fuel if you need to. They also help with that. They help regulate those things as well. So these are just the different sides of what we're talking about. This is the different pieces. Which side are you kind of like leaning towards or what? So the other controversial ones are the ones that I thought would just kind of be fun to talk about, things that you don't normally hear about. B13. Remember, we only went to 12, if I remember rightly, Tom. Okay, like here we have B13, orotic acid, Jerusalem artichokes, which are delicious, right? I love them. So there you go. Once again, this one is involved with a lot of different things, but with that heart rhythm, once again, being an important one about what that one may be involved with. How about pangamic acid, B15, that muscle fatigue, and then the lactic acid. Lactic acid, and then it says endurance, those two things go hand in hand. If you go down to the north end of Boise, you'll find these guys that wear like biking shorts and biking shirts, and they're in big packs of people riding their bike, and they're called the lactic acid cycling team. Why are they the lactic acid cycling team? Well, if you can't breathe very well, not breathe very well, let's say you're cycling, right? But you're gasping for air. Your body doesn't have enough oxygen to make the fuel process, and you start building up the stuff that's called lactic acid. That lactic acid builds up in your body, and then sooner or later you have to stop doing what you're doing. You just get too tired and you have to quit. You have to stop for a while and what? Breathe and let your body catch up and try to clear that lactic acid stuff out. So why are the guys wearing the lactic acid cycling shorts? Because they're going to power through that burn, right? They're going to make it through it, and that's cool. But so this pandemic, and then that's very important with that whole thing. Excessive lactic acid, trying to pull that off of your system. If you have a situation in which you just consistently aren't getting enough oxygen through your system, maybe your heart isn't pumping quite as well as you'd want it to. Why does your heart pump? Is it just for fun? Your heart's trying to push things through. What's the big thing your heart's really trying to push through it? Oxygen, right? And so if you don't have enough oxygen going through, what are you going to build up as you're using your muscles? Lactic acid. And what's it going to do? It's going to make you sore, cramps. You got it. The whole thing, everything stops functioning as well as you would like it to be doing. You get sore. So that's another one of these. And that's B15. I didn't bring up B14 or B16, right? Okay, but that's all right. B17 here. Here's another one. It's all about B17, like I was saying, about the side effects of, I brought it up because of surgery and the spreading of rogue cells. It has a lot to do with something called cyanide, which we won't get into. I thought I'd leave that word off the board. But there's a way that good cells can process this and turn it into something that's healthy. Bad cells don't, and it ends up causing cancer cells. Okay, and it has a lot to do with whether you're can I say good and bad cells? Can I just get away with that for a hot minute? About the way that would end up working out. So there's differences between all these different things about the way that they end up working themselves out. I'm getting moving. I realize I'm kind of dragging on. So my takeaway here is try to get your B vitamins from whole food sources. Do you kind of follow? Like, it's really important that we end up getting them from as much as we can. Processed carbohydrates such as sugar and white flour tend to have lower B vitamins than their unprocessed counterparts. Is this a board I can draw on?
I think you're right with
Yeah, this won't take long. I have like a kernel of wheat, and well, that's going to have to do. Okay, and then down here I have a little fraction, and then I have like this layer that's around this sort of thing. So this is like not a seed. Am I good with that? Okay. Within here, I have vitamins. I have some DNA to turn into a new plant. I have some minerals. I have enzymes. I've got a bunch of good stuff in this little part right here. This thing ends up being a big old carbohydrate, which C6H12O6, don't worry about that. So this is basically, let's just call it sugar. Can I get away with that? And then around here, there's this layer called a bran layer. Okay, this also has some vitamins, and it protects what's underneath here. What happens when I process food is it's like, well, if these guys sit in here, these enzymes will start to break down this thing. It's going to change what it's good for. The fats may end up, there's fat in there, may end up changing to change the flavor. So in order for me to sit this on a shelf for 2 years, I need to get this out of here. Does that make sense? What's in here was made to grow into a new plant. Use this sugar. When this bran layer gets wet in the spring, it lets water go in. The water activates the enzyme. The enzymes start the things going on here. It uses its fuel and it grows into a new plant. Are we close enough? Okay. So what do I want to do? I want this piece because this is what I want to eat, right? So if I want to sit there, I have to get rid of the bran layer and I throw that away. You kind of follow, because I have to get rid of that protection layer and I got to get rid of all this stuff so that I'm left with a bunch of this. This is what your this is what your white flour is and stuff along those lines. Do you kind of follow? This is your pasta type stuff that people end up hearing about. This is your white rice. This is all that sort of thing. This is the processed food idea. Do you kind of follow? I had to process that food. Now I've got that and I can sit around, that flour can sit there in the cabinet for as long as I pretty much need it to because there's nothing there to actually break it down. Would Mother Nature make something like that? No. Mother Nature makes it like, hey, you're supposed to grow into a new plant. So you can utilize that with so many. This is just a rough example. But we end up getting rid of that. In our example, the problem that's going to be here is getting rid of this bran layer because that's where a lot of those B vitamins end up existing as well. Do you kind of a lot of fiber and things like that? And what are we left with? We're left with just this carbohydrate source, and we take that and we turn it into some of my favorite stuff. Okay, tortillas and Wonder Bread and every other darn thing, okay, about the way that is. And so what we want to be trying to do is when people say eat whole foods, they're trying to say like eat foods that are a little fresher, things that haven't had this processing process take place to it. Processing process, okay? But do you kind of get the idea? That's a quick and dirty version of what's going on, but that's essentially what's taking place with a lot of those different things about the way that it works. So what they end up doing is say, hey, we just removed all the goodness from that, so what do we, in our infinite wisdom, we're like, well, hey, let's take a bunch of gasoline and coal tar derivatives and let's throw it back in there. Now it's enriched. Look at I've done this. Isn't this wonderful? It was there before. I took it away. Now I have to add it back in, and now I'm what? I am enriched. There's another word that's similar, and what is that? It is fortified. You've probably heard of, what does fortified mean? Well, it was never really there in the first place, but we'll put it in there anyway because you need them together. Here's some vitamin D and some milk because of calcium and stuff to kind of follow. There's a difference between what those two words are. But what we'll focus on here is trying to keep it on the B's, but that's our enriched flour about the way that is, okay? So there you go. So it's required by the government for them to put that sort of stuff back in. So that's a good sign that you're not eating what? Like a whole food. When you look at it, it's like enriched with it, you could be like, oh, that's bad. I've done this talk to you before, though. How do you know you're needing how do you read a food label? How do you know what you're reading on a food label is good or bad? First two ingredients is fantastic. I like to make the joke if it has a label. If it has a food label, it's probably not a whole food. An apple doesn't come with a label on it, right? Do you know, an orange doesn't, a steak doesn't come with, here's the first ingredient, do you know what I mean? But I agree. The more ingredients, typically, there are different ways to go about doing that for sure. Yeah, and the words you can't pronounce, I love all that sort of stuff. You're absolutely right. All that sort of stuff. But this is what we want to do, is try to eat as many whole foods, and if you've ever heard that before, that's what they're getting at. There's a whole store down in Boise called Whole Foods, right? Like, it's a big deal. And you go spend what? More money for them to do less to your food, right? Because if they let it sit, it tends to make them go bad sooner. Do you kind of follow? And they're doing this sort of stuff. I mean, I get why it happens, for what it's worth. So legumes are a really big source of vitamin B's, beans, stuff like that. Grains, potatoes, bananas, peppers. Nutritional yeast and brewer's yeast are the ones I like to focus on, as well as, of course, the liver and things along those lines, the things where you're going to be using. Vitamin B, you will find that sort of stuff. But nutritional yeast and brewer's yeast are some of the big ones. And those are some of the easiest ones to add. I think if you're just going to have a salad, you can have a little nutritional yeast to throw it on your salad. Do you kind of follow? You never know it. I make my own kale chips at home, and I use a nutritional yeast, and I swear to gosh, if you do it right, it tastes just like a Cheez-It, which I love, okay? And so, like, instead of eating my Cheez-Its, which I will do, don't get me wrong, but it's kind of got, like, that kind of a flavor to it. Some people, if you go to, like, the Flicks downtown, you can put nutritional yeast on your popcorn, sort of stuff. You can add it to things if it seems like, what the heck is that? That's kind of weird about the way that works. The brewer's side of the brewer's yeast, once again, alcohol-soluble stuff along those lines, about the way some of that ends up playing itself out. And I'm getting the cue here. Are there any, I can talk all day. I make the joke, never give a Trapp a microphone. Yeah, sorry. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to go through that. I hope that helped. I hope there was something somewhat interesting for you, a little bit different. Be paying attention. I think they're really, really important. I think you really want to be paying attention to how they affect the nerves and about what they end up doing in regulating that sort of stuff. It's something you don't typically hear about all that much. There's a way that all that comes together, though. Okay. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yep. Oh, stay here. And if there's any other thing you guys want someone to talk about, let the people who run the show these days know. I'd be happy to come back.
Your students, what do they do after this? Are they going to be an RN or?
Yeah, almost all of them want to be an RN, a PA, something in the healthcare field. I can't walk into a hospital or a doctor's office without knowing at least 5 or 6 different students that have been in my classes.
Wow, congratulations.
I've been doing it a long time. So yeah, it's cool. So many of you have probably worked with people that I've been teaching.
As your dad always says, it's not much, but thank you for...
Oh, thanks. I recognize the handwriting.
Is that your mom's?
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. I appreciate
We'll steal your mic now.
You guys are all fancy now. Microphones.
Yeah, we're getting high tech here. Okay, let's see. Why don't you give me Jack's award there? You coming up or what you doing? And then the Bruce one. I'll bring it up to you. Jack Marr, come on up. The price is right. I've seen Jack ever since I belonged to this organization, and we know he fills one hell of a big void over at St. Alphonsus. He donates his time there besides visiting people there, and he has Accredited Visitor Excellence of the Year Award. And we're sure he's